Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you would like to join us, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you all for coming. It's always nice to have visitors. First item on our agenda is to adopt the agenda.
I'll make it.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is our consent agenda, and items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. Is there anyone here who wishes to pull something off the consent agenda?
Madam President, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, that brings us to our regular agenda. First item on our regular agenda is the fiscal year 18 second budget adjustments, request for approval, and we will have a presentation by Christine Tanler, our budget coordinator.
That's right. Madam President, Commissioners, Christine Tanler, Budget Coordinator for the record. I'm here before you for a decision briefing on the FY 2018 second budget adjustments. The approved revenue budget is $131.4 million. We are proposing to decrease it just about $130 million. Some of those large changes are an increase in property disposal revenue, as well as an increase in impact fee revenue. The large decrease in federal aid and cost share is related to it's a true up of the bogus basin maintenance project. So there's also a decrease on the expenditure side to match that. What the bid came in lower than expected. Operational adjustments, we do have just a slight increase there. Most of them are miscellaneous maintenance adjustments, largely related to some equipment failures and stuff, some big engine repairs that we've had to do this year, as well as additional plow mounting for winter operations, with our proposed operational budget at $56.4 million. On the capital adjustments, we have an approved capital budget of $71.4 million. We're proposing to decrease that to $66.6 million. Those adjustments are, we have an increase in professional services. That does include the Cloverdale overpass, or the Cloverdale road widening project in conjunction with ITD. On the right-of-way, those are most of the right-of-way adjustments, as well as construction and traffic materials, are all related to the rescheduled projects. Got a list of those both last week with the FY 19-20 work session, as well as in your packet today. The expenditure summary is shown is $56.4 million for operational, 66.6 for capital, commuter ride just under $3 million, and we had proposed in first adjustments to the commission to move just under $900,000 into the priority corridor reservation. This does give us a proposed expenditure budget of $126.6 million. The variance between this and then the proposed revenue budget is the $3.9 million rescheduled projects. Staff recommends approval of the 2018 second budget adjustments. I will stand for questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Christine? Did anyone in the audience wish to address this item? Okay, Commission, you have it before you. We need a motion for approval.
Madam President, I move approval of the fiscal year 2018 second quarter budget adjustment as
Second.
outlined by staff.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Christine. I'm going to leave the meeting now. I have a plane to catch, so I will turn the gavel over to Vice President of the Commission, Rebecca Arnold, and you all have fun. I will see you in a few weeks.
Can you leave your packet?
Oh, okay. You want the agenda?
No.
No, this is.
Oh, that's not the, okay. All right. All right, the next item on our agenda is low agritourism. It is a request for waiver of policy. We'll start with a presentation from Stacy Arrington.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Yeah, sorry, the Vice Chairman and Chairman and all that. Thank you. Commissioners, today, Stacy Yerington, Development Services. This is a decision briefing. The application before you today is for a conditional use permit and master site plan to allow agritourism events such as corn maze, pumpkin patch, petting zoo, hay rides, produce sales, and other festivals and gatherings to be conducted on an existing farm. The project site is located on Eagle Road, south of King Road and north of Cunamora Road. The master street map designates this segment of Eagle Road between Cuna and King Road as a 5-lane arterial, and from King Road north for the next 5 miles up to Lake Hazel Road as a 3-lane arterial. Staff is recommending that the master street map be modified to a 3-lane arterial consistent with the other segments to the north. As part of this application, the applicant is required to dedicate 12 feet of additional right-of-way to total 37 feet from center line if the MSM modification is approved. The applicant is also required to improve Eagle Road with pavement widening to total 17 feet of pavement from center line and construct a detached 5-foot wide sidewalk abutting the site. However, policy states that the district may consider waiving the sidewalk policy when a project is located outside of a city's impact area and there are no pedestrian attractants in the vicinity. And staff is recommending approval of that waiver. The site has over 2,600 feet of frontage along Eagle Road. Staff attempted to work with the applicant and offered to purchase the required right-of-way and only require minimal frontage improvements to include widening the pavement to 17 feet from center line from their north property line to 500 feet south of the proposed commercial driveway, which is approximately 500 feet. The staff's offer was an alternative to the applicant's waiver request. However, the applicant declined and chose to request the waiver and is before you today. The applicant's letter and follow-up email that were included in the packet indicates that the applicant's reason for the waiver for right-of-way dedication is because the existing right-of-way is sufficient for now, and any roadway improvements in the future that the proposed use will not impede future right-of-way dedication. The applicant's request for waiver from frontage improvements is because the property will remain a producing farm. There are no existing improvements in the area to connect to or in the foreseeable future. Any road widening would be a system improvement rather than a project improvement, and the cost should be borne by system funds supplied by all roadway users, not exclusive to this project. And the expense would be a very inefficient use of resources and would place a disproportionate share of the system improvements on the applicant. If the commission approves the applicant's request for waiver, the commission will need to identify findings to support the waiver as outlined in policy section 7104.1 in front of you here. In summary, the existing right-of-way is not sufficient to meet the requirements of the master street map. Improvements such as pavement widening is a standard requirement with all development applications. And staff is recommending the 17 feet for that approximate 500. And I would recommend the staff report is written, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Commissioner Goldthorpe?
Does that 500 feet involve 5 feet of additional pavement?
That is correct.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay, then we will hear from the applicant next.
Oh, Madam Vice President.
Yes.
I omitted one. I need to disclose an ex parte communication that I've had. Completely slipped my mind when we began. The applicant and I spoke last week at some length about this and just had a general discussion. Asked a number of questions. He answered them. He asked some questions. I answered them. That's just the way it was. So if any of you have any questions of me as we go along with this discussion, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Goldthorpe. Now we'll hear from the applicant. And if you would, please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. What's the appropriate way for me to address you? Madam President, Vice President, I guess, here? It threw me off my game with Commissioner Baker leaving the meeting. My name is Jim Lowe. I'm I live in Kuna at 1820 North Firebrick Drive, and I'm here with my wife Hillary and our 3 children. We are the applicants here, and we appreciate you taking time to consider our request and our application here. Just briefly, some of you may be familiar with who we are, what we do, but I'd like to share just a little bit of that perspective. We farm in Meridian and Kuna. We grow feed corn and grain, and we also engage in agritourism. And in order to accomplish that, we grow pumpkins that we sell U-pick out of the field, as well as growing a field of corn that we cut a corn maze in. We offer hay rides and other activities, all oriented around the activities of the farm. This term agritourism is a new term for some people. Really, it means marketing the products and experience of the farm directly to the public. And that's something we've been involved in for some time. We've been holding our fall festival for a number of years in Ada County in the Valley, most recently in Meridian, but also in Kuna in years past as well. We recognize that this application does fall under the heading and the category of development. We also recognize that this is significantly different than what may be a typical residential or commercial development for several reasons. And for these reasons, we're asking for the waivers that we are. A few ways that this is a unique proposal. First of all, is that this will stay a production farm. And this is inherent to our use. It's important to us. A lot of the value that we can offer our patrons is actually coming to a farm. We host school field trips where we can show and teach. We work with IDOAG in the classroom and other organizations to help teach about agriculture here in the Valley. And we find that a little bit of entertainment and fun is a strong motivator for people learning. And so that's an important part of what we do. We think that that aligns with the county's goals and with the character of the area. And so we feel like it's important for us for this to remain a production farm. And that does influence some of what we do as far as infrastructure or development, if we're going to use that term of the project. This use is seasonal. The fall season is where we have some experience. This agritourism use is as an auxiliary use to the production farm. Will be a revenue generator, but it's not going to be generating revenue on the scale or scope of a typical development that covers this amount of acreage. And so that's a limiting factor for us as well. And lastly, this proposal of land use does not introduce the same obstacles to future development that other developments would introduce. We're not going to be installing major infrastructure or sidewalks or building lots or houses or anything else that would get in the way of the roadways in the future being further developed. And so for those purposes, we are requesting the waiver of the right-of-way dedication, frontage improvement, and sidewalk policies. On much of this, we're in agreement with the staff. For instance, the sidewalks that don't connect to anything else in the area and probably won't for the foreseeable future. We're several miles away from any other similar improvement. One issue that we have been back and forth on a little bit is the right-of-way dedication. And as was mentioned, the master street map designates that section of Eagle Road as a 5-lane arterial. Over the last couple of weeks, the discussion has been that maybe it would be more appropriate for that to be a 3-lane arterial. It currently does not and probably won't connect to the rest of Eagle Road because Hubbard Reservoir disconnects it. It's different than what we think of as Eagle Road, in other words, out there. At any rate, whatever that looks like down the road, I think it's safe to say that that is conceptual still and not a plan that's set in concrete and may change between now and when that becomes a reality. We've been told that that type of improvement is not anywhere on the calendar or on the construction plan. in the 20-year forecast. So whether that's 20 or 40 years or maybe never down the road, we think that it would be more appropriate to dedicate the right-of-way expansion when there's a little bit more visibility on that project. There is an existing right-of-way associated with Eagle Road that would accommodate expansion of the road. Anything that would be in the 20-year plan. We think that in combination with the fact that this proposed land use is not going to be placing obstacles to a future right-of-way dedication, in consideration of those factors, we think it would be appropriate for that dedication to happen down the road when that's a little bit more in range of what's going to be happening there. As an alternative, we propose that we treat that area the same as we will treat the future collector street pathways. The staff has indicated that on that half-mile line, we don't put any permanent buildings because we want to preserve that as a corridor that in the future could become a right-of-way. And we propose that we treat that potential right-of-way expansion in the same manner and not create any obstacles for that to happen in the future. The other item that we've been back and forth on is the frontage improvements, specifically the pavement widening. When this was brought up, we think it's a great idea. We think it would be a nice improvement to the overall system. We think that it would be nice for the roads to be a little bit wider, and that would accommodate cyclists and the ever-increasing traffic as time goes along for people going here and there and everywhere with everything, all the growth in the area. As the staff provided us an estimate of what the construction cost may be for that, but kind of the little thing that we didn't realize from the get-go is that we would also be responsible for the design and engineering of that project. And in talking with a civil engineering firm who reportedly does a lot of ACHD projects, for us to get them to engage on a project of this size, the minimum thresholds are such that the cost of the design and engineering and surveying will be almost double the expense of the actual construction that'll take place. And to me, that seems like a very inefficient use of resources. So I started doing a little bit of digging and trying to understand a little bit more about our roadway systems. And I've recognized that these improvements could be categorized in two ways, as either a project improvement in order to facilitate this specific use, or as a system improvement to facilitate the movement of people all about that we all contribute to. And in consideration of that, it's our opinion that this roadway widening, while it would be nice and would be great, and we would not be opposed to it, is really more of a needed as, if it's needed as a system improvement rather than to facilitate people moving in and out of our property for what we're proposing. I base that on a couple of observations, one of which is that there are several different operations currently happening in the valley in Ada County. There's one on Linder Road, there's one on North Eagle Road, that are both on similar type roadways, neither of which have the 17-foot from center pavement, and that has not been a condition for them to operate. We see even some other uses that are not similar but are in the area that also don't have that wide of roadway. And so that's part of what makes me think that it's probably not necessary for actually getting people in and out of the road, but it would, although it would be a nice improvement to the system. In addition, our driveway is located in a spot so there's good visibility going both directions. By my count, we've got, as I measure on the map, about 1,375 feet of visibility, both right and left, if you were to be entering Eagle Road. And Eagle Road, it's a 45-mile speed limit along that section of road. It's also midway between a 20-mile-per-hour curve just south of what you see on the screen there. It turns into Cunamora Road. That's a hard 20-mile-per-hour curve. And then to the north, there's a stop sign King Road. So it's not like people are traveling along on highway speeds for miles on end there. In consideration of that, we've also learned that we will be charged an impact fee for what we'll be doing out there. We don't know exactly what that will be yet, but the impact fee administrator has given us an estimate that we think is reasonable. And we're not opposed to contributing to the system improvements. We recognize that that's valuable and necessary. And we think that in consideration of all of those factors, that we allow that to be our contribution to the system improvements. The staff, going back to our very first pre-application meeting, the staff indicated two things to us. They indicated that we need to preserve those half-mile, the footprint for the future collectors, and that we would need to pave our driveway approaches back 30 feet from the edge of the pavement, from the edge of the roadway, and we agree to that. We think that that would be a good project improvement that would facilitate people moving in and out of our project. So I guess as far as the frontage improvement requirement, we ask a waiver from that policy, but what we will do is we will pay our impact fees as a contribution to the system improvement. We pave our driveways as the project improvement to allow people to move in and out of our operation. Lastly, I guess I'd just like to mention that we do appreciate what you do here at ACHD. We're in favor of your mission and your goals. We recognize that a safe and efficient system of roadways in the county is a critical part of our quality of life and is also necessary for us to be able to conduct business. On the farm, we have to be able to get our products from the farm to the market, and in the case of agritourism, our market to the farm. And so we appreciate what you're doing, and we hope that we can make this all fit in a way that will work. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Goldthorpe?
A question for staff. Is there going to be another 12 feet dedicated on the other side of the road eventually?
Yes, Commissioner, there will be.
Okay. A question for you, Mr. Rowe. Why was it exactly that you didn't want to just go ahead and sell the right-of-way now and possibly use that revenue for the staff's proposed improvements?
Okay, well,
I ask that because you can license it back for your use.
okay. Well, I guess it just, from my perspective, it seems like a complicating factor. One of the things that was introduced is that in order to do that, that we would bear the burden of surveying that and creating a legal description. And it just starts to seem like it's not the requirement that gets you, it's all of the things to support the requirement that ends up getting us. And so if that's necessary, then we're not totally opposed to that. It just seems like it's maybe not something that's right before us right now. And our proposed use is not creating any obstacles for that happening in the future. And also in consideration of the fact that what that road looks like down the road, to overuse the term road, I guess, but it seems like that's still fluid. It's still in the conceptual stage. And so I think that is a factor. Just how much right-of-way do we need there? We have an idea, but I don't know that we know that.
Another question for staff then. Would it really be his obligation to do all the surveying, everything for our right-of-way acquisition?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of that, Commissioner.
Would it really be his obligation to do all the surveying, everything for our right-of-way acquisition?
Yes, Commissioner, that is part of the development cost.
Okay. Is there any way we can waive that?
Yeah, legal.
Sorry, I'll turn that over to Gary. That is.
does seem like kind of an interesting approach to request something and then have the person who's going to give it to us bear costs for that.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, Gary Inselman, Development Services Manager. That is the standard procedure on all developments, is if they have to dedicate right-of-way, whether we're purchasing it or not, that they do the engineering and the surveying, and they bear those costs. It's certainly at your discretion to direct us to hire that out, but that would be abnormal. We generally do not pay those costs.
Okay. Another question that's kind of right along with the statement that was made that it's going to cost twice as much to do the engineering on the 5 feet of pavement for 500 feet as it will to do the actual construction. I see that as quite a burden on the applicant. Is there any way we can mitigate that?
And Commissioner Goldthorpe, I think the only way to mitigate that would be if that's part of your consideration in the waiver, and if you grant that waiver, that certainly in this market, small jobs are getting pricier for engineering and construction as they, with the market the way it is, and how busy everybody is.
Well, my next questions basically have to do with the necessity for that 5 feet anyway, and it's for the applicant. Do you have any idea how many vehicles parked there at the farmstead last year?
We don't have a count on vehicles. As far as volume of people, and what we've been working with the impact fee administrator is we have historical attendance of about 30,000 people in the fall, and it's not something that people generally come to alone. It's usually a family or large group, oftentimes even a church youth group or that sort of thing. So I guess you could extrapolate that into vehicles. We don't know what the attendance would be south of Kuna. We expect that our attendance would be impacted by losing the visibility of our current location right off the freeway in Eagle Road. So we expect that those numbers would potentially dip and maybe significantly, we don't know.
In your marketing plan, what assumptions have you made?
In our marketing plan, what assumptions have we made? I might have to look to my to my wife on that.
I know you do a lot of advertising. That's kind of why I asked.
Yeah, we think that if we move out there, obviously we'll have to get the word out that that's where we are, and we won't be able to rely on visibility. But honestly, we don't know when we would move out there. We're kind of getting our ducks in a row for when that time comes along, and so we haven't drilled down on what we think those numbers would be.
Has the credit union agreed to allow you to put up a big sign there on the old place to letting people know where you're going?
The news of the day, isn't it, that ICCU has purchased the property that we have been operating on. That's about all that we know. They've indicated, obviously we're there this year. They've indicated there's a high likelihood that we may be able to continue operating there for some time. In fact, I got a voicemail from ICC, from the credit union just prior to this meeting, saying that it's unlikely that they would be ready to do anything there even next year. So, yeah, we're kind of getting our ducks in a row here, but we don't know exactly the timeline on that.
I'm just scratching my head. I understand you run a profitable business. I've never been there. My family's been there a ton of times. Just scratching my head over the costs of going down and establishing yourself on a 2-lane goat path, and knowing what's down there as I do. I don't exactly frequent it, but I kind of compare it to what you used to see in the middle of the valley in the early 70s.
Okay, do any of the other commissioners have questions? Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, Madam President, I just want to clarify. So you've done some research on the design, the surveying, the drainage, the engineering to do the pavement widening of this 500 so you've done the math and done it, added up and compared it, and that would be a financial hardship, an undue hardship in the operation of the.
Madam President, yes, Commissioner, yes, and we have not drilled down on costs on that. We made a phone call to an engineering firm and said, okay, what kind of ballpark are we looking at here?
Ballpark.
And they said, well, in order to, based on the minimums to get somebody to engage, with as busy as it is, it's going to cost X number of dollars for survey, for engineering and geotechnical, for that type of a project.
And then the other question is, you've looked at the other area, the area surrounding it, and this would not be consistent with the other segments of Eagle Road near there, or the roads to the north and south. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, I've spent some bit of time driving around with my tape measure and getting an idea of, okay, what am I looking at, a 17-foot from center road here or not? And it's the rare exception. The only place in the area that I've found that there is that wide of road is where there's a bridge over the irrigation canal, and on both shoulders of that bridge, when that bridge was replaced, then it was expanded to that. But no other uses. Arrow Rock subdivision is out there, CS beef packers, various different uses, none of which have a 17-foot from center width.
All right, thanks.
I just had a quick question. What was the ballpark figure that you got from the engineer? What was the number?
They put us at about 35,000 for the engineering, geotechnical, and survey.
For 500 feet?
Madam Chairman, the problem is that whether it's 500 feet or if it's 2 miles, we're hitting those minimum thresholds to get them to engage on our project.
I see.
And
Commissioner Woods, did you have a question?
Yes, if I could, thank you. Mr. Lowe, I appreciate what you're trying to do here. I guess I'm a softie for the agricultural industry and what's left of it here in Ada County, and appreciate what you're trying to do. I think the challenge for the commission is we are charged with being fair with every application, whether we like it or not. Are we applying a standard of care that's consistent? So when I look at the two issues that we're talking about, the first is the dedication of frontage. I think what the staff is requested is not inconsistent here. We have a plan, it's on our master street map. We're actually going to modify it to narrow it, but I don't see the dedication of right-of-way being a financial hardship. I mean, you are going to, the way you've laid out the operations there, it doesn't seem to impact the operations. And so the challenge we have is that, in the valley, things change, and, it's hard to go back and acquire right-of-way later. And I appreciate what you were saying. We could, agree not to do things and where the right-of-way is anticipated to be acquired in the future, but we've seen plenty of instances where that becomes problematic. Things get built, things happen. We're not out there all the time, and then the acquisition of right-of-way becomes a lot more expensive and a lot more problematic down the road. So I didn't hear a lot there that was a hardship. I guess on the 500 feet, I mean, that's the one where we're having a conversation now. What we need to understand is that why is it a financial hardship? Unfortunately, just calling one engineering firm who gave you a high price is not quite getting over the bar for me. Like, we would need to, have some more evidence there. And I understand this is not something you do every day, so, maybe if we grant some time for you to dig into that, we could look at that as something we decide on later. But given the number of parking spaces I'm looking at there, widening this and I understand it's a seasonal business, and I hope we would adjust the impact fee to account for the reality of what's happening here. But to me, the widening seems to make some sense to at a minimum provide safe operation of your business. Whether or not that's a financial hardship, we need to know a little bit more about the finances of your business, and we don't need to air that out here publicly, but show it with staff and then what that cost is. But unfortunately, just calling one engineer, you'd have to do a little bit more rigorous work, I guess, for me on that. So that was just a comment.
May I respond to that, Madam President?
Are there any other questions? Okay, did you have a comment?
I-
or response?
I do, and I appreciate what you're saying there. And in fact, at one point in our discussion, the staff made a similar comment. Well, you shouldn't expect to be treated differently from anybody else. And that piqued my curiosity some bit. And I did do a public records request for the other operation that Ada County Development Services says most closely mirrors what we have applied for, and that's on North Eagle Road. It's Twin Oaks Farm. And in their application, I did find it interesting that the only requirement was the paved driveway. There was no right-of-way acquisition. There were no impact fees assessed, and there was no road widening as part of the project. And so when I found that, I felt like, well, I agree, and that it should be equally applied. And I'm not trying to point fingers and saying, well, but me or but they or anything else, but that is one thing that turned up in my legwork.
Madam President.
Go ahead.
Thank you for mentioning that. Maybe after public testimony, we'll ask staff to respond to that. Thank you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. What I said was we have to treat everyone fairly. That doesn't mean everybody's the same. And so
Right.
looking at another example like that is perfectly appropriate.
Well, and it may be that the right-of-way was already there. The right-of-way had already been dedicated at some point. Pavement may be wider in that area. I mean, without looking at the specifics of that situation, I'm not sure we're comparing apples to apples, but. Okay, were there other questions for the applicant? No? Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item? Okay. Are there questions for staff?
Madam President.
Commissioner Woods?
Could you respond to the applicant's testimony where he looked at the Twin Oaks Farm example and maybe that was different, or what the facts were there?
Yes, I can, Mr. Chairman, or not Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry. I'm just stuck on Commissioner Baker leaving today on the commission, so. Twin Oaks, that was part of a platted subdivision, I believe in the 80s or 90s sometime. I don't have that exact date, but right-of-way was dedicated as part of that application. It is a smaller piece. That section of Eagle Road also does have some wider pavement, and it has very wide shoulders. It's flat, and so people can pull all the way off onto the shoulder if it's necessary. And there were just different conditions with that application. And again, it is smaller site, and the right-of-way was dedicated. So it's kind of not. I mean, it's comparable, but not comparable. They did do a lot of temporary uses on that side as well, so. And on this site, we do have some ditches. We don't have very wide shoulders. We're barely making the 24 feet of pavement on this section of Eagle Road. So the sites are different, and that's kind of what we're looking at.
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner Woods?
Just to follow up, so with respect to the 500 feet of pavement widening, did staff consider the potential for gravel shoulder in lieu of some paving here?
Yes, Commissioner, on their side of the road, they would be able to fit the gravel shoulder in. On the west side, I believe, is kind of where the irrigation ditch looks to be. So they would be able to get that on their side.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff on this? Commissioner
I
Hanson?
just had a question. In order to make a finding, we have to reference specific language in 7104.1, right? Where in the memo is that language? So that I can reference it. It was recited to us.
Was that on one of your
I
slides?
think it might be just
It was on the slide. I'm not sure. I would have to look at the staff report to
We've done this before where we
There
have
it
to
is.
make sure we.
correct.
President and Stacy, so you made this finding in your staff report, so we would have to make it in our, if we were to grant any of the waivers that the applicant is asking for.
Correct. It would need to meet
You've already made some
those
findings.
outlines. That's correct.
Okay, that's why I thought that language was in the staff report where the findings were made, but it's not. That you could leave that up there. Yeah, Madam President, I think there's sufficient evidence because this is not a rezone, it's still rural, it's a farm. I agree with Commissioner Woods that the dedication of the right-of-way to 3 lanes is appropriate, and that preserving the collectors is very appropriate. But and paving his driveway approaches is appropriate. The paving of the widening, that one section though, seems to me falls within the requirements, without me reciting it, of 7104.1. This is still a farm. There's going to be a bunch of people show up there at one point in the year, but the other days of the year it's still a farm, and it's still pretty far out there. This isn't. We have a tendency to view things as developments. Development's a development, but in fact, this is turning a farm into a place people will visit briefly during the year. I don't think it's appropriate to widen that one section where the rest of the road nowhere else is widened. But the right of way is important. I think we have sufficient evidence to make that finding.
Are there further questions for staff? Okay, I do have a question for staff. Given the fact that there's a minimal shoulder there, or maybe it's non-existent altogether, do you consider it a safety concern if the road isn't widened beyond the 24 feet, given the increase in traffic that's going to be out there as a result of this use? Would you consider it a safety concern if we didn't require some widening of the road?
Commissioner Arnold, I think there may be a comfort level associated with the safety. Anytime you have a wider pavement, if you are going to see increased bicyclists, traffic, it is a 45-mile-an-hour road. It does afford traffic to, if someone is trying to turn left into the facility, it does provide a little more buffer, at least on the incoming side. So yes, I do see it as a level of safety.
Okay. And we don't have any bike lanes or sidewalks or any shoulders, any facilities for bikes or pedestrians there whatsoever, right?
Not currently, no.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, can I follow up on that? So,
Yes, Commissioner Woods.
Stacy,
I'm sorry to hear.
it's all right. So we would be, in the example that you said with bicyclists and whatever, we'd providing a safer area for 500 feet, but the rest of the overall area still has the same issue associated with it. In terms of level of comfort for safety turning left, and I apologize, but could you opine, well, could you just elaborate a little bit? And we're gonna have to go to the site map for a second, so Commissioner Hance, we can come back to this, but what activity further to the south, so, I mean, or I guess, people who are headed south, you know, to add to that level of comfort, you're turning left into the facility. How many cars or vehicle trips would we anticipate heading to the south, you know, during the peak hour or during the day? And same, you know, with the north, that would create sort of that conflict. Is this heavily traveled down here?
No, I do not believe that it is a heavily traveled road. Obviously, we're increasing it with this activity. But as we've seen, I think throughout the county, you know, we are getting more and more bicyclists going out, and I believe they are trying to get off the busier sections of the roadways. We're seeing a lot of development, obviously, to the west in the Cuna area and South Meridian area. So we are going to, there is going to be an impact with additional people coming in, and it will get busier, as we've seen throughout the county, so. Does that answer your question?
Yep. So a follow-up question, I guess. Can a waiver of policy be tied to level of activity? In other words, requiring the applicant to monitor how many trips, and, could we have a future trigger that, then requires the applicant to do this? If we waive it under the assumption that, so many trips are not gonna create a problem, is there a way to condition it such that if the trips exceed a certain number, the visits exceed a certain number, that creates an obligation of the applicant in the future to do something?
That might be a
I
question
think
for-
I would defer that question, to Mr. Inselman, if I can, please.
Yeah. Let's have our legal counsel answer that question. Steve?
Everybody's ducking under the table. I know I wasn't very articulate there.
I might make an attempt to restate his question. I think Commissioner Woods was asking if we had the ability to grant a temporary waiver of the frontage improvements, the pavement widening for 500 feet, until such time as the traffic increases to a certain point. And then that would trigger the requirement to pave it. Is that a legal way for us to word this? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam President, Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel, and Madam President, thank you for the invitation to come and answer your question. The answer to your question is yes. In many situations and developments, we do have triggers on growth of a particular development, and as you know, we'll do it with residential, so many units, and we'll require that'll trigger for certain system improvements or site improvements. The way to do that would be through the development of the execution of a development agreement where the applicant would agree to those. So I'm not necessarily sure that the waiver would be, it could be a condition of the waiver. It's simply that the development agreement would allow that to happen, and it would kind of act as a waiver with the execution between the district and the applicant. I'd also like to remind the Commission that this application before you is a conditional use permit, which is we're in a recommending capacity.
Madam President.
Yes, Commissioner
You're right.
Hanson.
So this is the sort of the flip side, perhaps. Seems to me, it just struck me as akin to the kind of events that take place in areas for a set period of time, in which we then require the person applying for an event permit of some sort to impose some sort of safety features on the roadways or the approachways to protect people coming in and out, directing traffic. Would that be able to address the sort of the temporary nature of this being, something that happens a few weeks in the fall, requiring them, which presumably they would in any case, come to us for some sort of event permit, unless the conditional use waives that, because you got a conditional use for those weeks. So it seems to me we could address the issues of safety of lots of people coming in one particular afternoon if they're required to do some sort of traffic control, just like we do with all kinds of community events going on this time of year.
Madam President and Commissioner Hanson, well, I'll have to respectfully disagree in the sense that when you have baseball stadiums, those are events. When you have concert places, those are events. The land use for that facility is the attractant, and it is more of a permanent facility. When you have events, those are typically for rights of way, people using the rights of way for special events, and those are the situations, let's say, parades or fun runs or bike races. And those particular rules and regulations, which are in conjunction with the city's enforcement powers, they are more focused on safety over the public right-of-way. This is more about a fixed location, more permanent. It is a land use type, and that particular land use has impacts upon the public rights-of-way that necessitate improvements to mitigate the impacts of the use of that property. So I can see how you're trying to mirror that in, but I don't think it fits.
Further questions for staff? Commissioner Woods?
I just, I guess I would, we had a motion, but no second. I would offer a substitute motion that.
Actually, you didn't make a
We
motion.
haven't had one yet.
We haven't had a motion
I
yet.
thought Commissioner Hanson.
No, I just was asking. I haven't made one yet. But
Oh,
I'm
okay.
happy to if you want me to.
Well, I guess my thought on this, Commissioners, is that, I think what I heard Commissioner Hanson say is that, the dedication of right-of-way is something that is not appropriate for waiver, but I guess I would be willing to move that we defer this to allow the applicant and the staff to work on a development agreement that would lay out an appropriate development agreement that would create a threshold for when pavement widening would occur. I think that in this case, the facts are agro-tourism is an emerging business, not sure how successful it'll be or not be, and so we applaud the applicant in trying to do that. And besides, we don't know what's kind of happening down in this area from a development perspective anyway. So it seems to me a development application, a development agreement with some triggers is appropriate, and if we need time to defer it, I'll propose to move that we defer action on this application for a request of waiver for low agritourism for 30 days to allow staff and the applicant to work together on a development agreement regarding the pavement widening to 50 feet for the 500-foot section as outlined.
Second that.
So point of clarification from our legal counsel, should we set it for a meeting, a specific meeting? Because we don't have a meeting in 30 days.
Still have to act on it.
28.
Madam President, again, Steve Price, ACHD, General Counsel. That's most certainly, if you'd like to set it within 30 days, I'm sure we can work out a development agreement within that time. But I would just send it back to staff, and then we can bring it back within a reasonable time frame.
So defer it indefinitely.
Yes.
Would you like to modify your
I would
motion?
like to modify my motion to reflect that deferment is indefinite.
Second that too.
And I would agree, and I'd say the one thing that I'd love to see if it does come back is much more specific data on the actual costs, because we have to make a finding of undue hardship, the actual costs, and I recognize this is probably a time where you're gonna get some pretty significant costs given the market. That may change, but to compare it to the costs that are now that you know, we have to make this finding in order to waive the cost of paving the frontage road.
All right, so we have a motion to defer this indefinitely and remand it back to staff to work with the applicant and bring it back at an appropriate time. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion passes. That concludes the items on our regular agenda other than public communications. Is there anyone here who would like to address the commission on another topic? Seeing no volunteers, we are adjourned. Thank you.